Hello and welcome to an episode of The Nutella Experience with featured guest and friend, Mr. Gutierrez. So, he's talking about this whole situation, like, about Muslims and Christians. So it's very
Sorry, I'm finishing up and I'm listening.
No, go ahead. It's interesting how he's talking about this whole bit where you have to find this gimmick until you actually find what your
Right.
purpose is.
Right.
And I like how he went on about how Christianity and all that was his gimmick, and it's very interesting how that whole bit played out. I was very intrigued.
Explain
about that. So his whole gimmick was Christianity, and I like how he went really, really, really deep into Christianity. He went, like, the pastor was like, all right, so whose kid are you? And then he's like, that was his bordering on father figure from that point.
Yeah.
And then that just spiraled into him getting deeper into Christianity, and then he just started, like, he went deeper into the point where he just started preaching to just people. And I like how and he was young too, to be preaching the word of God to just about anyone that he could speak to. And then it was interesting how he went from Christianity to not being very religious at all to being confronted by the Muslim community as well, which is really it's a drastic difference. It's really just the polls on that one are it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. So, like, he goes to Christianity and then he stops, and then it's just to Muslim or to Islam. There we go. The polls that he goes to are kind of extreme, but also really entertaining at that. It's like, I don't know, he's kind of messing with everything a little bit, and then he's like, and then he just comes to his conclusion from that.
So why doesn't he convert to Islam?
I feel like he doesn't convert, I think, because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was good, but he was very singular minded.
Mm-hmm.
I think he might have converted had it not been his narrow mindedness, I think, because he said it himself, he's a very charismatic, convincing person in himself, but he isn't exactly a person where he can change people because he can understand how you think. He's very narrow-minded. He says, this is how it works. This is how it should work. This is how it needs to work. And he has that very focused goal, but I don't think he understands the point of view from other people as well, which is kind of what I think turned him off. It was a little bit interesting to think about that. It was his
Hold on one second.
So,
this is my niece.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good, and
Who's
you?
that out there
Doing
creeping
right.
around?
Caroline and Annabelle for being idiots.
Hello.
What's new, though?
Nothing.
Honestly.
Hello, Annabelle. So I'm meeting with Abraham right now, but come by tomorrow. I'm just hanging out. We gotta talk about getting you a bass guitar too. All right? I think you should get one you can play before you buy one online.
Alright.
So I told your mom I'd keep my eyes out, and I haven't found anything yet, but we can go out one day and cruise around.
You play bass?
She's
I'm
just starting.
wanting to learn. Yeah.
Sick.
Guitar Center is a good place to get instruments.
That's what I wanted to
Where is?
Guitar Center?
We'll go there. And we'll go to music go round.
That's where my brother got all his instruments.
Is it?
He's like fancy music producer.
Music go round is good too because they sell like used instruments, so they're a lot cheaper.
Yeah, and sometimes used instruments are better because they've settled. You know, if the neck is going to move at all or anything. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys soon. I'm sorry that I'm kicking you out, but that's exactly what I'm doing. Later.
No, but yeah, it was. I think had the Honorable Elijah Muhammad been a little bit more convincing in his, well, not convincing, but a little bit more understanding to his predicament, I feel like he might have been converted to Islam. I think, because he said himself, he's very charismatic, but he's very very narrow-minded.
Yeah.
And I found it interesting how he never asks a person directly a question. He always bounces it off someone else. That was kind of funny as well. But I think that's also a little bit beside the point. But
no, that's totally cool though.
It's like you're asking him a question. So what do you think about this? And then you just like expect him to answer. So that was that was a little bit funny, I thought. But there was also this one bit. There were a bunch of other stuff that I had highlighted that were, well, not highlighted necessarily.
So
but
talk to me about what Baldwin says about some of the things we've been talking about the social implications of race, particularly how it affects young black men.
So he goes off about this a little bit, because can I start from like the newborn part?
Yeah.
All right, so he starts with talking about like the newborn being brought into this whole neighborhood, and the newborn's kind of just like, he's brought into this ghetto, and it's just knife pistol fights and all of this other stuff. He's brought into it. That's all that he knows.
Yeah, and it's the lottery of birth. He's not there because he deserves it. It's
he's there.
Just there.
Which I find it's almost kind of the same as it is now. Granted,
Sure.
I feel like it's a little bit more deliberate, but nowadays. But
What do you mean deliberate?
it's a lot more, like in the way he explained it. It's you happen to be there by chance. That's just how it ended up to be. Now I feel like it's maybe just a little bit more, you're intended to be there. If you end up there, you ended up being there. No worries. But that's how it ended up. That's how I think it is a little bit more nowadays. But it's interesting how he says, it's interesting how he described that situation. Everyone's in that situation. Well, not everyone, but the newborns are there by chance. Like they're brought in there into this world of darkness and despair, and that's just how it is. That's how fate, I guess, intended it to be. I think it's just wild. And I mean, I can kind of I think it's a little bit true in that sense. Just because, I don't know, it's, no one in the hood really quite knows properly what they're doing unless they're making money. If you're just there trying to make your, not stamp, but survival, you're kind of just there in the moment trying to get yourself going. I mean, what you're doing.
What about families who are holding it together, who may have a religious background, who do stress education for their kids? I mean, those families are in the hood too.
True, and I feel like that the reason why they're still there, halfway knowing what they're doing, is through religion. Religion is what has kept them in the halfway decent straits that they're in. They stress education, like staying away from the immorals of of the hood, the drugs, the guns. They stress not being away from that. And that's what's kept them intact as a family and mentally. Because if you go in it, you're almost already gone. There's hardly a single way that you can get out normal-minded after that.
I think that's right.
And the religion is what has kept them okay. Had they not had that, they'd be just like anyone else. They'd be doing what they can to try and make a little bit more money, trying to avenge the loss of a loved one. They'd be trying to do all this extra stuff, and then in the process they lose themselves. That's the reason why those families are still there, is because they're not in that whole circle. They have this whole belief of forgiveness and getting over it, and then still staying out of it. But the ones, and I don't know, I feel like the Black Panther Party kind of, I don't think they quite stressed that, though. I don't think that, they...
What do you mean?
So how they did it, it was good how they had these free programs for like food and clothes and medicines and stuff like that, but also as well they were toting a 12-gauge shotgun in the middle of a street trying to protect themselves as well. I mean, in a way that also promotes violence. That's a
problem.
That's not exactly a good way of going about it.
Yeah.
But also as well, the whole the nonviolent movement as well worked to a certain extent, but also it has its drawbacks because you take hits. You get hit by all of these racially charged white people, and you just have to sit there and take it, and eventually you're going to snap. There's no one that can handle all of that without not snapping. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
And I guess you just have to find the middle ground in between that to see if you can just gauge that. It just doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that sounds right to me, Abraham. That once you mix in the element of violence,
it gets out of hand really, really quickly.
It does, because it's always present. The potential for it is always present. The minute you have a gun, the potential for catastrophic violence is that much closer.
Yeah, and Baldwin, I don't think, goes into it too much. I didn't quite get a good feel of that from him, but it's just from the Black Panther Party itself. They did a lot of good with all their programs and stuff like that, but I think it also set back the mental image that other people have of black people, because that promoted black people being more violent than potentially what they were. They might have been. I don't know. I didn't live in that era, but
well, and it because of the visibility, it's easy for people to sort of paint with a broad brush, right? This is what the African American community is like. They're not looking at a Baptist church.
Unfortunately. I want to go to a Baptist sermon and stuff like that.
It's pretty awesome.
I really do. But
there's one African American church on, or I should say Black Baptist, I guess, on Wyoming, just north of Manal.
Oh, nice. I think I've passed by it
so
many times.
There's
Isn't there like a car shop next to it or something?
That's exactly right.
I'll probably go raid that place one time, see what it's
should,
like.
Man.
But
I went one time for a Yaffle fundraiser.
Oh, yeah.
They were having at campus, and the people were so awesome, and the service was so
I need to go to a service one of these days, but anyway, beside the point. But also it's he also talks about this it's he compares the Holocaust to the predicament that the black people find themselves in, because he's talking about how the white people are so astounded that the Nazis just exterminated 6 million, like that, but the fact that he's surprised by their reaction, how surprised they are, how shocked they were at how they could do such a horrendous thing. And I think his reaction to that was correct. His reaction of being surprised at their reaction, that they could be so ignorant to the situation at home, to how they have exterminated millions of black people in the process of slavery, in the process of Jim Crow as well. I agree with his reaction, because I mean, it wasn't quite, I mean, it was as systemic, but it wasn't as
dramatic, because
there we go, that's the word,
because it became status quo for over 100 years.
Right, and
right, whereas the Holocaust is temporarily
5 years,
5-6 years,
extremely brutal in that. But I mean, you have to also think about, I mean, in that 100 years as well, in American slavery, the brutality was unreal. The situation that the blacks have lived in was equal to the Jews, if not worse. The only part that I can think up of that the Jews were in a more brutal situation was just torching them alive.
Right.
Although even then, probably blacks were in the same situation as well. So I can't exactly say it was more brutal.
Right.
It was just more normal.
And it was generational, right? Can you imagine? It's not like generations of babies were born in concentration camps. Which is not to minimize it.
No, of course, no,
you know?
Not at all, by any means.
But what I think the effect on the American psyche, black and white, given the fact that that's our history, is incalculable.
But also, I think, partially, a reason why it was more surprising to the white American mind was that Americans don't really give a shit about religion. They really don't.
We pay a lot of lip service to it.
That's true.
But you're right.
We don't give a shit about, like, if you were a Muslim, if I was a Christian, I'd be like, hey, that's kind of sick. What do you do? Yeah. But we don't give a shit about who does what. We care about skin color, what happens to that skin color, and who did it to that skin color. Like,
well said.
The Jews, I'm assuming the majority, if not all, were white, and that, I think, is what pissed off the American mind so much, because
I got you.
Because, yeah, right? Because the black people, they're inherently inferior, and I put that in quotes because that's just how it was then. Right. But then the Jews in Europe, they're still white. If they get hit, the Americans are like, whoa, that's a white person getting torched right there. That's not good. But you could do it to just about any other skin color, we won't give a flying fuck.
We didn't invade the Hutu and Tutsi massacre, right? It wasn't Uganda, it was you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. Give me a picture of this one. I know I'm
Rwanda.
There we
there we go. Rwanda.
Yeah.
Right? We didn't invade then, and how many people were murdered?
Who? At least 100. Some.
Oh,
it was in the hundreds, I think, if not thousands. I don't quite. It was a large body count there.
800,000 in 100 days.
Damn, I was off by a lot.
Almost 1 million people in 100 days.
There we go. Yeah, that's I mean, that's excessive right there.
And we could have, you know,
We could
We
have done
could've
something
intervened.
about that, but we still didn't.
we didn't.
Which goes to say something about how, in Baldwin's time and even still in our time, we still care about the color. We still do, and it's that like 200 years right there. Well, 200 years. I feel like it's more, but that 200 years changed. It's hard to change a 200-year-old mindset. It's almost
entrenched.
impossible to change.
You know, I mean, the only thing you can do is time. You know, effort over a long period of time, because you can't legislate that people see race differently.
Right. It's hard to do that, and even still it's not. I mean, we had some success, but and then the hard thing about that is you can't really have too many setbacks. And once you do have a setback, you're back almost to square one again. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's the comparisons between the Holocaust and the slavery, it's still going on. It still exists. It's still there. Which is not good. It's
I was watching.
gotta keep going.
I was watching The Wire the other night. We're on the very end of the last season.
I started it, by the way. It's
Did you?
good. It's good. I'm on like the 3rd episode right now.
Okay, so you're down in the towers.
Yeah. That's good.
And at one point, I can tell you this without giving anything away.
No, that doesn't
Freeman,
matter.
who's one of the detectives,
Mm.
he said they're talking about the murder rate in, you know, inner city Baltimore. And it was like 360 young black men were murdered in that neighborhood this year. And Freeman tells another detective, he says, "You think we'd have a hard time getting money for this investigation if that had been 360 white boys?"
Whoo! He
Right.
straight roasted him on that one.
Right? I
Whoa.
mean, and he's
No, he's very
He's right.
correct. He's very, very correct. Like, it's very situational.
dude, I gotta finish up. I gotta go down to the library.
Granted, that was completely my fault about timing.
That's
but
okay. You wanna meet a little before the film on Wednesday?
Yeah, no, that works.
Let's do that. So, but I gotta. Is this our last week?
Is this our last week? I don't know.
When are presentations?
Shoot,
I thought
let
they
me
were
check.
next week.
Let me check.
And
Hold up.
because all of a sudden I was in
I like how Baldwin was talking about this one bit. There were 3 principles in accordance with the white and the black church, and it was interesting how he said that they were blindness, loneliness, and terror. I found that extremely entertaining, just because, I mean, I find it kind of true, because the blindness part,
Can you tell me more about what he means by each of those?
I'm going to give you my best interpretation.
Okay.
Blindness, I think, is what he... Huh? Sure, thanks. Blindness, from what I can assume, is his version of saying is kind of like forgiveness. They're blind to the fact that they have been short-sighted their entire life, and they keep on forgiving them for it. The whole loneliness part, I wasn't quite sure about this one, but bless you.
Thank you.
But the loneliness part, from what I can assume, is the community being not quite... I don't know how to quite explain that one, but the terror I think is a little bit more clear, in that they keep on they keep on forgiving them. They keep on being blind to being short-sighted by them the entire time. And so now, but they're still afraid because they always keep on forgiving them. They still keep on doing it. So they're afraid of them doing it back to them, but that always happens to them. I'm not entirely sure about the loneliness one. That one was...
Well, I think I can see how that fits in. I mean, what's interesting about that is that it's like the responsibility for the social change that needs to happen ends up always falling on the victim.
Yes. That's very true.
Does that sound right?
No, yeah, that definitely sounds correct. Because it's still, I mean, it's happening even still.
Yeah.
I mean, rape victims are always the one that are accused of having that done to them, which is why it's so hard for them to come out. Black people have always been short-sighted, even though we're the ones that have been oppressed all this time. Latinos for coming across the border to search for a better life, and yet they're the ones accused of degrading the U.S. So, I mean, it always goes to the victim, but, and I guess that's the loneliness part, is we're always in a separate camp because we're always the victim and we're always being blamed, but we're not the ones to be blamed. It's always the aggressors, and but the winner always tells a story. The aggressor always tells a story. The victim is always blindsided. We don't get a say in it. And so I suppose that would be loneliness. But I find it also really funny that he says, I would love to believe that the principles were faith, hope, and charity. But this is clearly not so for most Christians, or for what we call the Christian world. It's funny because just about everyone calls themselves, or a majority of people that I know call themselves Christians, and they'd love to believe that faith, I'm pretty sure they do, or they'd love to believe that faith, hope, and charity is really the case, but in the world, it's most definitely blindness, loneliness, and terror. But before I say anything about that, I want to say, he says something about, he says that blindness always comes before loneliness and terror. And I think those are some of the truest words that I have ever heard in my life.
Now tell me why. I mean, how do you read that passage?
So blindness is always, and he says it here, the first principle necessarily and actively cultivated in order to deny the two others. So I read this how, like, blindness needs to happen first in order for the terror and the loneliness to happen. The blindness is there first in order to have it keep on happening, in order for it to keep on for the normalcy to be the situation, and the loneliness happens as a result of the blindness being, because the loneliness, the always being separated into a different camp because of always being victimized. You're always in another camp. And in order for yourself to be in another camp, you always have to keep happening to yourself. And the terror part, for it to keep on happening to you, it has to be blind. It's always a cycle.
So it's like a self-contained system, right?
But
like every part feeds into the other two.
But I feel like
what you're saying,
the blindness always has to come first, though.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, once the blindness is there, it's definitely a self-eating cycle. So it has to start with blindness, though.
So how do you break that? Does Baldwin say?
I didn't see anything about him breaking it in here. As far as I mean, the system always starts with blindness. He said it. It's clear that it always starts with blindness. However, I think in order to break that, you have to break the blindness. But in order to break the blindness, you have to not forgive them, which is very unchristian. And so there you fall into your trap, because the majority of the black community is very, very deeply Christian, and they believe in the values of forgiveness, self-righteousness, and all the things that fall into that category. And you can't, and forgiveness is like it's pretty much at the top. In order for that loop to break, the forgiveness has to not be there, and to eliminate that from the equation is extremely hard, even regardless of how humans in and of themselves act.
Do you think that was in part one of the appeals of Elijah Muhammad's brand of Islam? Is that it was able to break from that sort of majority Christian point of view?
I think,
or at least it provided an alternative.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's why that they were a little bit more successful in their attempts, because I mean, forgiveness, I'm not Muslim, so I wouldn't quite know all too well, but I'm assuming forgiveness is a part of that whole thing. But you can't from what I can glean, it's not, you have to also defend yourself too. So if you get hit, you can't just not get hit again. You defend yourself. So
it is, to me, one of the most troubling passages in the Bible is when Jesus says, when your enemy strikes you, turn the other cheek. Like, let him strike you again. And it's so hard to understand exactly what that message is and who lives that.
It's very nonviolent. It's a very Martin Luther King-like thing to do, but at the same time, look at how well it turned out for him. No offense to him and his great work at all.
None taken.
But, he got whacked. Very, very clearly whacked. But that didn't quite, that also happened to Malcolm X, but he was at least defending himself.
And yeah, that's right. And I think Malcolm X's Malcolm X's public statements almost made an assassination attempt inevitable.
Right, because of how controversial he is, and just his situation in itself. The fact that he said those things very, very, very publicly. That in itself is calling more attention than you want to yourself. But at least he had this whole idea of protecting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Martin Luther King didn't. He preached nonviolence even when you got attacked, which is, it gets you places, but only to a certain extent. This passage that he's saying here, this whole that blindness is where it needs to stop.
In the 50s, is that right?
Let me check. Originally published in hardcover in 1963.
Okay.
So it's pretty much in that time period. Okay. Yeah, it's in like the 50s, 60s area.
But pre the big Civil March explosion.
Yeah, just before that. But also, it's like, it makes sense though. To turn the other cheek, it's not, you can't simply do that. You have to, I suppose you could forgive him the first time, but at the second time you also have to defend yourself. You can't simply just be open the entire time, just saying, hey, here I am.
Yeah.
And while you're also preaching this controversial message, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
There has to be a certain measure of protecting yourself. Granted, if it truly was faith, hope, and charity, I don't think any of this whole situation would exist. So we'd all be living fine and dandy. It'd be Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden still. We'd all be living naked, eating apples and stuff like that, having a fine and dandy time. But that's not the situation. That's just not. Unfortunately.
Right, but what's the difference toward, are you making a sort of a blanket how can I put this? I mean, are we talking about here about the fundamental sort of nature of human beings? Or are we talking here about a social situation which systematically oppresses people based on skin color? Do you know what I'm saying?
I think. And sure, here, keep going. I want to see if I got this right.
So you're talking about, you know, sort of a view of human beings that says, well, you know, it'd be nice if in a state of nature we were kind to one another, but if...
The reality is that it's not.
Right. Or are you saying that Baldwin's critique of Christianity is rooted not in an idea of natural law, and not in the idea of what human beings are or are not fundamentally, but a response to our particular national situation as regards race and the history of race?
His response is definitely the latter, and I think I just made it a little bit more broad.
Okay.
But I definitely think his response was definitely his response was definitely towards the latter, in that it was a lot more focused in that time period. Granted, I feel like if he looked at it a little bit more broadly to around the world, I think possibly he would change his view on specifically from America to around the world, considering, I mean, the colonization times in Africa were Europeans just oppressing the African races.
Right,
but
European countries parceling out Africa as though were a cake that they all wanted a piece of.
Right, and that would be the same thing with Asia as well.
Sure, but I think to a lesser, or to a different kind of extent, right? Because the thing that seems to make Africa unique in the history of colonization was
they had resources.
Economic reality of slavery.
That's true, but they also had they had diamonds, they had oil, they had gold, they had a lot of physical resources as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, I suppose Asia had different resources as well, but more possibly valuable. I mean, all resources have their value as well, but like gold and diamonds,
more easily accessible.
Right, and they've had a track record of being taken over pretty quickly. So
yeah,
that's that thing, I guess. I think that's why Africa was a bigger deal. But no, I think if Baldwin were to look at it at a more world view, I think he'd say, I can't speak for him, but I think he'd say that it's definitely a speak on just humanity in its essence, in itself, rather than specifically an American phenomena. But granted, I can't speak for him, so.
I mean, what you say, it seems absolutely right.
But anyways, kind of on a different tack. He also talks about a means of inspiring fear. He says this as well. Negro has proved that one needed, in order to be free, something more than a bank account. One needed a handle, a lever, a means of inspiring fear. It was absolutely clear that police would whip you and take you in as long as they could get away with it, and that everyone else, housewives, taxi drivers, etc., would never, by the operation of any generous human feeling, cease to use you as an outlet for his frustrations and hostilities. I find that, like, he's preaching when he says that right there, because it's also true today. You find the police still using excessive force, even though they're still exonerated.
They choked Eric Garner to death in public, and there were no criminal charges filed against any of the white police officers that did it.
And it was in public.
It was in public.
That's what got me. I mean, if it was with like maybe one or two people watching it, that's a different story. But in public, That's what gets me right there.
And they walked.
Exactly.
So do you think that's what Baldwin's talking about right there?
I think so, because I mean, he says that one needs a means of inspiring fear. The Black Panther Party did it halfway okay because they had like shotguns, guns in general.
They were militant. I mean, it was
exactly.
It was their militancy, I think, more than the actual arms that provoked the fear of the Panthers.
Exactly, but it's, I mean, the means of inspiring fear at this point, it's the fact that I am black. That in itself inspires fear because no one knows how I'm going to act. I might act white, I might act black, I might act gangster. No one knows who I am as a person. The chains that I have on maybe say a little bit of something. Mm-hmm. They might stereotype me because of that, but I don't. And they might think that I have a gun in my belt or something, but no one actually knows. At this point, the fact that I am black inspires fear.
Yeah.
No one back in the day, back in the civil rights movement during the whole like march and everything, that the state of being black did not inspire fear. It inspired the idea that I might be able to be exploited. That was the idea that it inspired.
But isn't the fear always sort of underlying that idea of exploitation? Isn't there always the possibility that exploitation in the mind of the oppressor will somehow lead to a reaction?
Eventually, yes. I think that whole idea would take lots of time because at that point you're still oppressing the person, but there's a certain amount that person can take without saying, okay, this really needs to stop. I can't take this anymore. And that is more of a thing now, I think, since there's more news on these kind of topics and more people knowing
there's
a lot more about the topic. Yeah, the fact that more people know about it, that helps in that now the oppressor understands a little bit better of the concept of fear. In the 60s, I don't think that was a thing because there was also a nonviolent movement going, and that also hinders that idea of fear. Because if there's a nonviolent person and you just start beating them up, they have to stick by unless that person truly isn't a nonviolent person, they're going to stick by their word and not throw back punches.
Yeah.
So that doesn't inspire fear. No. If you're not going to throw a punch, I'm not going to be afraid of you. I'm skinny. I'm 6 foot 140. I could beat you up any day if you're nonviolent. Are you talking to me right now? Are you serious? No, that doesn't work. If you're violent, then I might be a little bit scared because I'm skinny, right? I'm easily beat upable. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's a word, but besides the point.
Gotcha.
You get the idea, and so that's just how it is. That's the nature of it. It's if the violence is kind of the idea that you might incite violence, not even actually inciting it, just the whole might, the if, is necessary, because if you don't, and that's a certain idea, no one's gonna fear you. No one is going to have that idea of, he strikes fear in me, therefore I'm gonna stay back a little bit to see what this guy does. That's the reasonable idea that follows next. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way it is. That's that means of inspiring fear right there. That's a little bit of a crux that is necessary to turn the table around to say, hey, maybe I might actually do something. That's the little bit right there that's necessary. But until you have that, that's not truly gonna actually happen. So at this point in the cycle where the black people are close, the mentality just isn't there yet. We inspire fear in others. Especially when you start. Granted, you have to think about it just as a majority. As a majority, I'm not quite sure yet. But if you go to Baltimore, D.C., or somewhere where
Chicago.
it's a rough neighborhood, and you see a black person there, you're gonna fear him. That part inspires fear. The rest of the country, though, that part's a little bit in the gray area, so I'm not quite sure about that. But at least those people, they just need to get their mind right, and then they might possibly be able to get some change going. But until then, nothing's gonna happen, I think. But anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Entertain me, because you definitely have this whole contemplative face going on right now.
What worries me about that is the need to inspire fear. What prevents that from ultimately resulting in a
straight war, bloodshed, civil unrest type deal?
Well, what stops the oppressor from being able to use the same handle, as Baldwin puts it? And if they hold social power, isn't that handle going to be a stronger source of fear anyway?
I think, because if you get it into the mind of a person that's the only way to change it, and that's the only way that it can be done, at that point the social handle doesn't even matter at this point, because they have it in their mind that the social handle needs to change, right?
Yeah.
So at that point they're going to be like, this needs to change or I'm going to die trying. That's the nature of the human mind. If you get it into someone's idea, in someone's mind deep enough and strong enough, it's not going to change for just about anything. It's extremely hard to change that. And at that point it's easier and a lot more efficient to just kill the person. It really is. As far as a social stick goes, yes, it is a lot stronger than what that handle of fear inspires. It's very strong. It's the governmental bat right there that you're about to get swung with and you're about to get hit with.
Right, I mean, it takes us back to Baldwin's notion of forgiveness. What are the three?
The three were the three bad ones or the three good ones? The three
battles.
The three bad ones?
Yeah.
All right. It's blindness.
That's it.
Blindness, terror, and loneliness. Those are the three. And at that point, yes, the governmental stick wields all three of them, mainly blindness. But at that point, since blindness doesn't exist anymore, the terror might still be a little bit there because of the government.
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah. Terror, I think, is the last one, but that's also, other than blindness, the hardest to get rid of. Because terror of the government is like, they possess the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and SWAT.
Well,
that's hard.
More than that, they hold the ability to pass legislation, to gerrymander voting districts, to pass laws regarding the rights of felons, to pass the kinds of drug laws that put young black men in jail for pittances.
Precise. And to make a contemporary reference, those are the 6 Infinity Stones right there. Told you, man.
I know what that means. I have watched so much Avengers with my son.
How many times has he watched it?
Oh, I don't even know, dude. It's on in my house all the time.
Wow.
We watch him a lot. We went to the theater last week to see
Endgame.
Endgame. Yeah.
How was it? I mean, granted, you're
good. I mean,
really
the second half, I got a little worn out because it's just nonstop.
Right. But
the story's good.
Well, there's a go watch right there. But yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
No worries. That's completely okay. I need to know this anyways because I haven't watched it yet. But no, and as far as social society goes, those are the 6 Infinity Stones that are detrimental to the black community right there. Is the 4 armed forces, SWAT, and legislation. Legislation makes all of that all the militancy from the government happen.
Sure.
And that's what still keeps us oppressed, is the fear and terror of the government. Blindness is starting to erode a little bit in modern day society, but I mean, the terror is still there. Police brutality is still there. That in itself, I mean, come on. It's the terror of those three, that
whole
branch.
criminal
It's not
justice system from top to bottom, right?
Exactly.
It's antagonistic.
very. It's not. It's as far as fairness goes. Fairness doesn't exist in that section.
I think that sounds right.
It doesn't. If I were to go in there for anything,
There's this great scene in this. I was showing this to my
Freedom
sophomores,
Riders.
and it's about a school in Long Beach,
right?
and pretty hard Scrabble population. And this teacher comes in and starts working with these kids. But there's a great scene where this teenager, he's in 10th grade, and he's writing in his journal, and you can sort of hear his thoughts as he's writing, and he tells this story about when he was a kid. I think he was 10 years old, and his best friend got a gun. And they're sitting on this park bench, and they're talking about the gun, and the kid's saying...
Do they have it with him, or is
Yeah,
it... okay.
They pull it
it's
out
like
of
in his
bag.
lap, yeah.
Yeah, and so he's got the gun, and he's like... And they're holding it, and they're saying, man, it's heavy, and all this stuff. They're two kids, right? They're just
Right.
kids,
Right.
And the kid, the kid that's holding the gun says, yo, man, we gotta learn how to use this now if it's gonna protect us. And the gun goes off, and he shoots himself in the head. Boom, kills himself right there, which happens in this country not infrequently, right?
Right.
Kids kill themselves playing with guns. So his friend stays there with him, waiting for the police, and when the police show up,
They think he shot him.
they arrest him. They send him to juvie.
Complete sense. Did they check the gun at all, or just...
Oh, I mean, he just, that's where the story ends, but it's great because it's that evocation of, when the police arrived, they saw a young black man
holding a gun?
with a gun and a dead black man next to him, and the automatic assumption was murder.
Right. It's not accidental by any means. I think it was deliberate. And
Right.
that's just the nature of the situation, unfortunately. But yeah, no, as far as right now goes, if I were to judge on the cycle right now as to how far it's gotten in breaking it, I would say that the blindness is starting to erode. Just by the nature of news and publications about this topic, about police brutality, about the
and social
terror
media,
and everything.
Right? People being able to capture that kind of violence as it's happening.
Exactly.
So that it's no longer sort of word of mouth, he said, she said. It's like
It's visual.
evidence.
It's right there. It's evidence, right? And yeah, as it is happening, you can see it. That's evidence that it's happening. Once there's not so much blindness anymore. That starts to erode. And now once you get that, those other two things start to break down too. The loneliness of that you are not alone, that is key.
Yeah.
And then the terror of also being alone and being attacked starts to erode too. Granted, that's the last one to fully actually degrade, but even still.
Because that's the one that the community
That's
doesn't
deep-rooted.
have direct power over.
Exactly. That's deep-rooted. That's all in the mind right there. But once those two start fading, then... And blindness in itself. Once blindness cracks and it's completely broken, those other two are going to fade fairly quickly. But until that happens, it's always going to be this whole circle of forgiveness. Well, not necessarily forgiveness, but not knowing the full truth, and then being alone by yourself thinking, this may have just happened to me, this might happen to me, and being afraid that it's only going to happen to you, or it's just happened to you.
So, does reading Baldwin give you hope for positive change?
Marginally, yes. The fact that he spotted this cycle early and he preached it, at least through books, and I'm assuming through words as well, because...
Yeah, you gotta watch some video of him. I'm sorry. In fact, let me speak myself, because I keep forgetting to find that disc.
No, don't worry about that. But yeah, I mean, him preaching and putting it out in words, he's spreading the word. The blindness will eventually erode to the point where it's going to crack, burn, fade, all of the above. I don't know. But he got it started. And it gives me hope reading this, because since it was spotted 50 years earlier, now I can I'm reading his words. I'm seeing it for me for the first time, and I'm like, yeah, all right, bet this is starting to happen now. What I have to do is I need to accelerate it. I need to make some of this work.
Yeah.
Right? And there are people in front of me doing it already, currently. And now, my job in knowing this knowledge is that I need to make sure that I can help. I can do something to make sure that this won't happen.
What can you do?
What can I... Shoot. That's a great question. As far as I'm concerned, that's a thought process I need to consider. As far as help, I know I need to help. The help I need to provide.
Do you
is
think
a good
even
question.
Just raising your consciousness about the issue contributes to the solution?
I think so, yes, because
I do too.
As long as I know I need to help, that in itself is a step forward.
And
I need to do something.
Even talking to other people and raising consciousness about the issue, right? Fosters change.
Right, because at least there's a seed of thought that's going into their mind and sheds a little bit of light on the situation.
Even if it falls on deaf ears initially.
That's fine, because it's at least sitting in the back of their head, and they might wonder, hey, is he actually correct? They might take it upon themselves to look at this, and if they figure it out that, yes, in fact, this is in fact happening, it might change their way of thinking, and it's a whole tree branch right there. It'll help a lot more people.
Right. Martin Luther King said, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice.
Always. Let's hope it keeps bending that way.
I think about it all the time, especially in our day and age, when we see the rise of white nationalism again and neo-Nazi rallies and hear hateful rhetoric out of our politicians' mouths.
You say something needs to change. And yet you say something needs to change, and that's good. But now let's take it one step further. Let's actually foster that change.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what you got to do. Is once you find it, then actually change it.
Yeah. Dude,